Do's and don'ts for how to introduce people to whiskey. I'm Daniel Whittington, Chancellor of Wizard Academy and Whiskey Marketing School. This is a bottle from Austin Barnesness, who's a somm. And the topic of this video came from a comment in the Whiskey Vault Facebook group. I said, hey, what do you guys think we should be talking about on these episodes? And Carlos Sanders posted this question: what are the basic fundamental do's and don'ts for introducing people to whiskey? And I was like, that's a great one. I love that. And I came up with 3 things because that's how my brain works in lists. And I'm really excited to try this. I'm going to tell you all about it in a second, but I'm going to pour it first. Thank you, Austin, for tracking something down real cool. Okay. I would argue that there's 3 things when you're introducing people to whiskey. Now, I'm assuming for the purposes of this video that the person you're introducing to whiskey is not a whiskey drinker at all. Maybe they like other wine, maybe they like other alcohols, maybe they like do shots, maybe they only like cocktails, maybe they're not even a drinker, which is a whole other conversation. But let's assume they have some familiarity with alcohol, because otherwise they're just going to have to get over the ethanol burn of high-proof spirit. I've had people for whom my first pour for them was Laphroaig, the smokiest screw you whiskey on the planet. I mean, close to. I don't think so, but I love Laphroaig, so I'm the wrong judge. I had one of them who talked about it as a hate crime for years. I have another person that I poured Laphroaig for the first time I met them, and we're getting married this year. And I've often said, or about Emma, someday maybe she'll look at me the way she looks at Laphroaig. So there are both sides to this thing, right? My point of that is I've had aggressive bourbon-only drinkers who hate Scotch, and then I poured them Octomore, and for some reason, Octomore was the one that made them go, you know what, I kind of like this one, which absolutely fractured my sommelier brain. And I'm looking at you, Chrissy Martin, a little dab of bourbon, because that's who it was. And when she came to the Scotch level 3, she spent the whole time going like, And then we got Octomore, and she was like, oh, hey. And that makes no sense to me still to this day. I've had other people who don't really like bourbon and love smoky Scotch, and I've had some who only drink Jack and Coke, and I've seen all of them react in completely diverse ways to a pour. So to say, well, if someone's new to whiskey, you should pour them this. It doesn't work that way. It turns out there's no specific whiskey path into liking whiskey, because everyone's palate is different, and someone's going to react to smoke and hate it. Someone's going to react to smoke and fall in love, and that's how it works. But there are some fundamentals that are true regardless of what you pour them as you try to help them discover the next step in their whiskey journey. And that's what we're going to talk about. But first, we're going to talk about Connemara. And Austin managed to get, I had said at one point, I love Connemara, but I would love to get my hands on a cask strength version of Connemara to see what at full proof this thing tastes like. And Austin brought one to Whiskey Somm School. And now, remember, Connemara is a revived brand name, sort of. If you remember our Irish whiskey history, by the 1960s, Irish whiskey had collapsed until all of Irish whiskey made in Ireland was made by one company down in Cork in Middleton. They'd even closed Bushmills temporarily. And in 1987, John Teeling founds Cooley Distillery, Cooley, and because he looked at this landscape of Irish whiskey and was like, hang on, we need more options. We need some independent options here. And so he bought up an industrial alcohol plant and he founded Cooley. And when he converted it to produce whiskey. When he created it, the first thing he did was revive a bunch of old brand names from historical Irish whiskey brands. Kilbeggan, Tyrconnell, Locks. He even bought up the old Locks distillery and it's the oldest one of its kind in the country, and revived it. And Connemara was one of the brands. The other thing he brought back was double distillation whiskey, done more historical instead of triple distillation. That was becoming more common in Irish whiskey. It wasn't always common. And he revived a historical recipe of peated Irish whiskey, which historically was a very common thing for certain eras of Irish whiskey history. And so it became the first peated Irish whiskey in who knows how many years, hundreds plus maybe. And it's probably under that. And was the only peated Irish whiskey until his sons at the Teeling Distillery, which was founded in Dublin, brought up the Teeling, what do they call it? It's got a bird, anyway. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, there's a couple more peated whiskeys now, but Connemara is the first revival one. And I've been really excited to try this. So that was a lot of history for some nosing and tasting, but it smells so good. So it's that super vanilla pastry, honey and cream sweetness, just like really dominating the middle, but layered over it and under it and laced through it like marble cake is this like meaty smoke. Not ashy, but like it's got weight to it smoke. It reminds me, and there's a kind of an ethanol punch to it, sharpness. It reminds me more of it's really a hybrid. So it's not quite as meaty as Highland peated scotches, and it's not quite as briny and salty and ashy as some of the island and coastal peated scotches get. It's sort of like kind of crawling through the middle, but all of the sweetness, instead of being floral or fruity, is dense pastry, buttercream, heavy sweetness. I like the nose. Oh, whoa, hey, there's a left turn in there. And then it turned into ashtray. Wow, like legitimately, I was not expecting that. So if you're a cigar smoker, there's a time in your life where you smoked a cigar, stopped, set it down, it went out, and you let it sit for more than an hour before you came back and you realized you still had 3/4 of a cigar left out there, and you're like, screw it, I'm just gonna relight it. And you relight it, and you start puffing, and your first next 2 or 3 minutes of that cigar are just burnt and ashy and leafy and like funky. I'm getting that sort of like phenolic smoke that's almost like a funky, overdrawn cigar, slightly stale. That's bizarre. I've never tasted smoke like that ever before. Yeah, but it's coated in honey. Wow. That is actually unique. I don't think I've had a smoke of that sort. It's closer to sort of like the American hardwood smoked stuff, malts that I've had, than it is to Scotch. That's a really interesting journey. I know I got a cask strength, but I'm going to water it down just to see what happens. 1 bloop, 2 bloops. Probably took that from 57.9 to maybe, 55? 53? Okay, I'm going to let it settle for a second. I'm just integrating it. So there's 3 things when you're introducing someone to whiskey that I think you need to remember. Number 1, unless they're asking about it, don't bother. That's rule number 1 of introducing anyone to anything. If they're not asking to be introduced to it, then don't. If you're at a party or a gathering, even if it's at your house, ask them if they want a drink. And if they say anything other than like, I'll have what you're having, or anything like, yeah, do you have this? Make them what they want. If they want a whiskey and Coke, make them a whiskey and Coke. If they want wine, you have wine, pour them wine. Don't worry about it, right? So, move on. Just pour it for them. Find a way to make them happy. Now, number 2 assumes that they've expressed some level of interest in understanding whiskey or trying what you're trying. Like, hey, I'm at your house. I know you're a whiskey person. Show me some whiskey. Remember that this is the time not to give a speech, but to ask questions, right? The point of a shepherd is not to stand 30 feet away and shouting at the sheep to come over to you. There are steps 1 through 30. There's more, but... And a good guide doesn't stand over here and try to talk them across the pond or yell at them to get over here or grab them and yank them from 1 to 30 in one fell swoop. That's called pouring Lafroig for the first time. A good guide finds out where you're at and then walks towards you and takes you 1 step further. That's all. 1 step further. And if that step turned out to be really easy and you're excited, take you 1 more step further, but never more than 1 step at a time on a willing path, right? So the reason that you spend on level 2, question number 2, ask a ton of questions. What do they like? Do they like wine? Do they like cocktails? Do they like sweet things? Do they like savory things? Try to understand what they prefer, because the next thing that you pour them needs to be as close to their current wheelhouse as you could possibly get. If they are a whiskey drinker and they like whiskey and Coke, maybe try introducing them to smoky Coke instead of just whiskey. If they like whiskey and rocks, maybe try a weightier whiskey, a high-proof whiskey and rocks. Maybe try a whiskey and water. You see what I mean? Just sort of, and if they always drink whiskey on the rocks and they're like, no, I want to try it neat, then introduce them to the idea that even the pros add water to whiskey. And so your first sip is just to experience it, and then after that, add water until you enjoy it, and do that until you add less and less water over time, right? So help guide them 1 step further on their journey. Number 3, be gentle. It is not your job to convert somebody. It is your job to lead, provide options and opportunities with grace. That's your job. You remember those? You ever seen those YouTube videos where like someone finds a stray dog and then they spend like 6 hours like getting the dog to actually, or days or weeks, getting the dog to like actually eat from their hand and relax and realize it's all going to be okay? Very heartwarming. That's kind of what it's like being a whiskey guide, a whiskey shepherd. Is you're just, when you're starting with the complete noob, you're just sort of gently guiding them down the path, and eventually you can pour them Connemara Cask strength if all goes well. All right, with a little water, the ashiness that was in the palate comes forward in the nose. Still super dense vanilla sweetness. Oh, okay. The palate's more gentle, but it ends with a really band-aidy medicinal note that reminds me of like really funky spring banks that don't have a sherry influence. This is closer to Springbank than it is to any other Scotch I've had. Bourbon cask Springbank. There's been a couple of Springbanks that I had like Harvest something editions that were a little more bourbon cask than wine cask. It's closer to that than it is to anything else that I've had. Very interesting. Anyway, good luck guiding those in your life into interesting whiskey journeys. Remember the 3 steps. Cheers to you, and I'm really glad you're here. All right, if you're just new to your whiskey journey, or you've been here for forever, and you haven't liked and subscribed, then step 1, watch the videos. Step 2, like. Step 3, subscribe.